Well, hello, everybody. It's 6:30 and it's time for the Planning and Development Council of the town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets?
Mr. Mayor, at this time, it's just Councillor Chisholm.
All righty. Thank you very much. I suppose there's a chance you could phone in as well. If you or anyone else, is interested in participating in this evening's meeting, I'm speaking to the public now. The dial-in number is 905-815-6095, and we'll repeat that as we go through the meeting. The next thing is on the agenda is to check and see if anyone would like to declare a pecuniary interest in any of the agenda items. And I'm not seeing anybody, so we'll move on. It would now be in order for two people to move and second us into committee of the whole. Councillor Shi and Councillor Chinna, thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. That carries, and we're now resolved into committee of the whole. We have no consent items tonight, and we have public or confidential, and we have no public hearing items tonight. But we do have a discussion item or two or three. And the first one is the Town of Oakville's Parks Plan 2031 and Parkland Dedication Bylaw for 2024 to 34. We have a presentation, as I am told, by Ron Palmer from the Planning Partnership to explain how we're adopting this plan in order to increase our parkland as we continue to grow. Mr. Palmer, are you ready? Because if you are, we are all ears and eyes, and you have the floor and the screen.
I am ready, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. Great to be here virtually in Oakville to address the committee this evening. Just before I begin, I want to say we've been working very closely with your staff and with your council with an S for the last couple of years, and it's been a terrific collaboration. So I'm very happy to be here tonight to present this plan. Next slide, please. You may recall that I have been before you a couple of other times over the last 2 years. The last time was on November 13th of last fall, where I gave you a presentation of where we were at the time with the Parks Plan. As you are all aware, we've been aiming at a bit of a moving target as changes in provincial legislation continue and affect parkland dedication in the town of Oakville. In November, there were a number of meetings held, school boards, a virtual public meeting, a virtual meeting with the development industry, as well as with the Community Leaders Roundtable. Lots of great commentary, resulting in a lot of adjustments to the Parks Plan since the last time you've seen it. We have also received ongoing correspondence with Build and from a number of individual developers as we continue to work through the process. Next slide. We did go through the Parks Plan 2031 and a bylaw on August 9th, 2022, and that bylaw was approved by Council on September 12th of 2022. Subsequent to that, Build and a number of developers did appeal that bylaw to the OLT. And subsequent to that, Bill 23 came into play, and that dealt with a lot of the elements of concern from the development industry. And we've worked through some adjustments to the Parks Plan and some adjustments to the Parkland Dedication Bylaw and its associated Parkland Policy and Procedural Manual to respond to Bill 23 and to consider the elements of appeal from Build and the developers. Next slide, please. Importantly, the whole idea of Parks Plan 2031 is to look at how the town acquires parklands through the development approval process. Of course, to respond to the various elements of legislative change. And I can tell you each of those bills 73, 197, 102, and 23 did have an impact on parkland dedication and the ability of the town to achieve parkland through the development approval process. And fundamentally, the intent of the Parks Plan 2031 is to provide a justification so that the town can utilize the maximum permitted parkland dedication rates that are identified in the Planning Act as it has been adjusted over time. Certainly, the idea is that the town will be able to utilize the alternative parkland dedication rates to the maximum extent possible. And that's really what the purpose of Parks Plan 2031 is, although it covers a host of other topics. Parks Plan 2031 doesn't do everything for you with respect to parks planning. Certainly, we don't deal with specific park space issues, where they are, how they're designed, how they're maintained, what facilities they might accommodate, or we don't attempt to understand the future requirements for recreation facilities across the town. There is a good reason for that if we go to the next slide. And that is because you're currently in the process of preparing a Parks, Recreation, and Library Facilities Master Plan. It's an update to that plan. It's well underway. I'm not part of that work, but certainly that is going to answer a number of the questions related to park facilities themselves, and particularly recreational facilities going forward. So that there are companion documents in my mind. They don't cover the same ground, but they certainly work together to make sure that the town has the park spaces, the types of parks, and the facilities that go with those parks across the entire town as we move forward over the next 10 years. Next slide. The content of Park Plan 2031 is pretty straightforward. There's an introductory part. There's a discussion of current legislation and policies. There's a whole section on the value of parks and how they impact commercial and residential property values. And then Chapter 4 is a series of recommendations. For the most part, the recommendations find their way either into the Parkland Dedication Bylaw or the Parkland Procedural Manual that accompanies that. Parks Plan 2031 also includes 10 appendices that deal with a host of topics that find their way into the recommendations. So it's kind of the support for the various recommendations that are included in the plan. Next slide. Just to remind everybody, without getting into a host of issues and details, the town and Parks Plan 2031 is really focused on what is called the campus of parks. Oakville has quite a diverse array of public park spaces. And it's important to remember that the campus of parks concept is to make sure that across the town you have a full array of parks, but that not every park fulfills every role. The goal is that you have a diverse and robust system that provides the appropriate level of service to your existing and future population. Next slide. Historically, the town has utilized an active parkland target of 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people. And this plan, Parks Plan 2031, believes that that remains a reasonable target on a townwide basis to the year 2031. However, it's important to remember that the town is becoming more urban. Your not planning for much more greenfield development beyond North Oakville, because you don't have much land left beyond North Oakville, and that already has a plan upon it. As population increases and intensifies, eventually your ability to achieve the 2.2 hectares will become more and more challenging over time. And certainly the tools provided to you through the Planning Act won't be enough to get you to 2.2 hectares per thousand people. So you're going to have to start looking at tools that can augment your ability to acquire parkland. And I've provided a list here of typical tools that are available to the town to augment actual park acquisition. Next slide. The new legislative rules in the Planning Act also talk about two alternative ownership models that must be considered going forward and are included in your new legislative tools, your bylaw and or your procedural manual. One is known as a strata park, and that's where town ownership of the land comes over top of a structure, whether that be a storm pond or a parking garage or something like that. That is still a form of town ownership. And the town is responsible for design, maintenance, and programming of that space. You already have a strata park, I believe, in downtown Oakville. But nonetheless, it's now part of a strategy that would count towards parkland dedication. The other one is called a POPS, and that is a privately owned space that is publicly accessible. That can be either built over structure or not. However, the intent is that these are smaller spaces that if it's in a condominium, the condominium retains ownership. However, there are legal agreements in place that space be open and accessible to the public. And it is the responsibility of the condo corporation to build it and to maintain it to appropriate town standards. And again, these count towards parkland dedication. We still await the regulations from the province to tell us if their land area counts for 100%, or if it's some reduced value given the encumbrances associated with both ownership models. Next slide. One of the things the Parks Plan 2031 does is it draws a contrast between the traditional parkland system, which is big public parks. They're green, they're programmed. Oakville is one of the best municipalities at this traditional parkland system in the GTA. You have a terrific system already. What is new is an urban park system that tends to be a little more diverse in its scale, smaller scale, flexible use, tend to be a bit smaller and connected by the public sidewalk system. It becomes part of an interconnected urban open space system. Your official plan doesn't currently include that hierarchy, but as your strategic growth areas start to continue to grow and intensify, the urban park system will become more and more prevalent in those locations. Traditional parkland still appropriate in your greenfield communities, North Oakville, as well as in your traditional neighborhoods. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Again, this is your traditional parkland system. Community parks, which are very large, neighborhood parks, and then parkettes. These are the three elements that you work with in your traditional neighborhoods and has been planned for in North Oakville. Next slide. In the urban park hierarchy, we have a larger component of public common. We have urban squares, which are smaller, and then a promenade, which is an enhanced sidewalk space that can be utilized for spill-out retail, cafes, or just broader linear park spaces. And there's a few examples of those across the GTA. In addition to those parts of the urban park system, next slide, please. There are another layer of typically much smaller spaces that include connecting links, pocket parks, and sliver parks. They're quite small. They would tend to be the park elements that would potentially be subject to strata ownership or POPs, but nonetheless, they're an important part of a robust urban connected system. Next slide. One of the things we looked at was in a strategic growth area, what is a reasonable amount of the land area that should be in these urban open space elements? The research that is included in the Parks Plan 2031 suggests about 12% of the gross land area in parkland. And again, it's really important to note that it's the intent that that 12% is primarily in the larger elements of the system, the public common, the urban squares, and the promenades. And that system is augmented by the smaller park elements. The whole idea is that these various elements are distributed throughout the entire strategic growth area. But certainly the intent is that it's primarily those larger space elements. Next slide. In terms of your parkland dedication bylaw that is before you tonight, it certainly is an important element, and it does, in my opinion, conform with all the recent changes to the Planning Act. It establishes the requirement for parkland conveyance, including the alternative rates as they have been adjusted over time by the province. It talks about not only residential development, but commercial and industrial uses and other non-residential forms of development. It does implement the new cap on parkland dedication, 10% of land or value on sites of 5 hectares or less, and 15% on sites that are greater than 5 hectares. It provides for some exclusions from parkland dedication, including additional residential units. It establishes a formula through which you can calculate parkland dedication requirements on mixed-use developments where there are a mixture of residential, retail, commercial, office uses, and so on. And it talks about when in the approval process, the value of a parkland dedication is to be established. The goal with the timing issue is simply to conform with what the Planning Act tells us you are supposed to do, which is what you've been doing historically anyway. Next slide. As I mentioned, there's also what we call a parkland policy and procedural manual. And that document fundamentally takes all of the, or most of the recommendations that were in the parks plan that aren't in the parkland dedication bylaw and puts them in a procedural manual to give staff some guidance to be able to give council the best possible advice as you work through the development approval process. It's the procedure that talks about the parkland hierarchies, the options for parkland ownership, the how parkland is calculated, and how lands are to be dedicated to you. The parkland policy and procedure is going to be available and reviewed by the public this year, looking for council adoption after that process is complete. Next slide. This is the last slide, and this is really the recommendations from the staff report. Although I would note that number 2 and number 3 are reversed in order. So we're really hoping that council will receive Parks Plan 2031, and that the Parkland Dedication Bylaw be received and approved, and that the park policy and procedure also be received at this time. And with that, again, thank you very much for listening to me. I'm happy to try and answer any questions that I can.
Well, you've been good in that regard. Councillor Elgar will start you off with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. To you, Mayor Burton. I appreciate the presentation because I think it was helpful a lot. My questions, I got a few. I went back to the 22 report that we initially had, and I'm just trying to understand the urban squares in size used to be 0.25 to 1 hectare, and I notice they have now shrunk to 0.1 to 0.8 hectare. Just wondering what happened there.
Well, as we work through the commentary from various folks, we made some adjustments. You'll also note that the public common does not have a maximum size, so it can be a minimum but no maximum. So it's just a matter of refinements as we work through the process.
So there was really nothing provincially that had to change. It's just that somebody shrunk the part, I guess, eh?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
And was that yourself that shrunk the part? Like your consulting team?
It was myself along with consultations with staff.
I see. Okay, I appreciate that. Recommendation 26. Hang on here. It seemed to change quite a bit also from the original in 2022. Can you explain what was that because of Bill 23?
Let me see if I can find it here. I'm hoping I have the same number 26 that you're looking at. It talks about an acquisition strategy.
Yes.
Recognizing the limitations. Yes, we've made a number of changes to the recommendations that are based on Bill 23. And this is really about looking at some details. It's not a statutory element of the parks plan recommendations. It's really an idea that you're going to start within each of your strategic growth areas to look at lands that may be available for acquisition in order to make sure that you get up to at least that 12%. Keeping in mind that development will happen incrementally over time. So if you're looking for a larger element, you need to start looking sooner rather than later. That's all that's about.
Okay. Now on number 31, town used to have sole discretion, and I noticed in the new one, the sole discretion, it's kind of gone. It's now, I guess you have to be in consultation with the developers or the owners of the land. What caused that?
That was comments from Build, as well as adjustments to the legislation. Again, it was partly about making sure that it's not, you don't have the sole discretion to make that decision, I think is the ultimate answer. So we wanted to recognize the reality of how it actually works.
Okay, so in 2022, we didn't really have the sole discretion the way it was written anyway? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. On that
okay, I appreciate that. Recommendation 32, the initial one was land dedication always be a first priority. And now, of course, it's outside of the defined strategic growth area. That's a pretty major change.
Well, I do think that it's appropriate that wherever possible, council get the land rather than cash in lieu. However, and this is part of a broader strategy about your 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people. Land values are substantially higher within a strategic growth area, and there may be an opportunity that if you're not able to get the land within the strategic growth area, the value of that cash in lieu might get you substantially more land outside of the strategic growth area for the same amount of money. So we wanted to make sure council had that tool available, keeping in mind that I didn't want you to be totally put into a box where you would have to start accepting land that you didn't want within a strategic growth area, or you had an opportunity to acquire larger pieces of land outside of the strategic growth area for the same amount of money.
Okay, so that was why the change was done. Okay, because I didn't care for that one, but that's, you know, that's my opinion. 47, the word hazard or flooding, I should say, was removed. Why was that taken out? Lands that are susceptible for flooding, and in the now it's lands that are identified as hazard lands having poor drainage. The poor drainage was always in there, but why was flooding excluded?
Hazard lands are floodland.
Okay, okay. So it doesn't, it's just when it says as hazard lands having poor drainage, erosion, extreme slopes.
That's right.
So it could have still said flooding, poor drainage then. So because the way it's written in the original one, it says it didn't say hazard lands, it just said flooding, have poor drainage, erosion issues, extreme slopes, and then it goes on. But the new one says lands that are identified as hazard lands have poor drainage, erosion issues. It doesn't say anything about flooding.
That's because floodlands are hazard lands. They're already defined as such.
So how does poor drainage hazard lands too?
No, those are lands that just may have poor drainage because of grading, but not subject to the 100-year storm.
Okay, I do appreciate that. I thank you. And my last one, because there may be there are other questions. Number 52. I find it interesting. Initially, it said that the review shall include consultation with council. The new 52 blew away council. We're not involved. Why did that happen?
I don't recall off the top of my head, although this one's just really talking about negotiating and maintaining records.
Yeah, and they said the review shall include consultation with council, other town staff, and affected stakeholders within the town. Now it says the cash in lieu parkland dedication record and associated financial statement shall be reported to the town treasurer. End of story. And I just wondered why council was wiped out of that decision making.
I don't recall. I'll have to go back and ask and see if I can find an answer for you.
Well, no, I appreciate it, and thank you so much for the work you've done on it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Elder. Councillor Nanda?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. Thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate the information that you provided to us. My council colleague, he had several of the questions that I had, so I appreciate going through that. I did want to make one point, and I know you did just clarify this, but I do feel that it is still, I find it an issue that with the payment in lieu, that that you can get land anywhere else in the town. I think just with our strategic growth areas and the lack of land that we have as it is, that if that starts happening, payment in lieu, there's going to be chances where we have areas where there won't be any green spaces or any parts within walking distance for kids to play in, for seniors to walk in, or just in general. So one of my asks was gonna be that it does stay within the area if there's gonna be payment in lieu. We do have one area in North Oakville, which, I myself was surprised there's no green space within that area. Therefore, those families don't really have any sort of neighborhood area for their kids to go to. And for them to go to any near park, they literally have to be driven, or it's a very far walk. So I think my concern is if that continues in the north, it's really not going to benefit our community. Is that something that we can look into again?
These are just recommendations. Council gets to do what council would like to do. And again, I think that this is something that would be in the procedure manual. And I will raise it with, as well as the issue of council's discretion in the previous question. Those are things that can be considered before you adopt the procedural manual, because it's not in the bylaw itself.
Okay.
But that's fair enough. I understand your concern.
Okay. And then to my second point, and just quickly as well, is the other concern that I kind of found was with the promenades and the connecting links and having them added as parkland. Again, it comes back to there's no soft spaces. It's not really a place where people can congregate or kids can play. If it's in front of cafes or restaurants, it's not really a place that you can utilize as what I would define as a park. So I'm not sure this was always in there. This is something new that's being added. But the connecting links and the promenade, they don't seem to be under definition of what would be considered parkland dedication.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, again, that's fair enough. I have the reason that I put them in there as a parkland is that there are instances where you will want a wider sidewalk element. So let's split connecting links from promenade, because there is a great example of a promenade that is in Appendix 3. And I just happened to be sitting about 3 blocks from it. And it's the Front Street promenade that goes through the Canary District here in Toronto. And it's quite a wide promenade. And it does include children's play areas, public art, and a host of other elements. So in that case, that in fact is a public park in the terms of the city of Toronto. And it's quite a nice feature with a host of recreational facilities in it. So but that's big. A connecting, the reason that I've put that in there, again, this is all based on my own experiences, is that when a municipality is wanting a much wider sidewalk space, the key is how do you get it? In Toronto, there was a lot of experience where staff would say, we want it, you have to give it to us. And the development industry would say, well, we'll happily do it, but you need to acquire it. And parkland dedication is one way to do that. So it's on the list. I'm trying to give you lots of tools to create great public spaces within your strategic growth areas. Those are 2 elements that I think are appropriate for consideration. Whether or not you actually implement them over time is you need to see what the proposals are and where they are appropriately located. They're not right everywhere. but certainly they are part of the hierarchy.
Thank you. I appreciate the information, and at least it gives us a chance to have a conversation about it. So thank you so much, and thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I appreciated Councillor Nanda's comment about promenades versus the public space. I can appreciate when there are children's parks or public art installations nearby, that adds something to the community. But the wide sidewalk is a direct, or the necessity for wide chunks of concrete is a result of the density that has been put into the area. And so looking forward to seeing how we can satisfy both of those. In terms of the SGAs, I appreciate your comment in terms of the cost of the land in strategic growth areas. You talked about the suggestion of acquiring space nearby the SGAs. Any sense in terms of how close is good close, as opposed to perhaps, you know, once you go past a certain distance, it does little for the residents in that community?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a very good question. If the intent that the space is to augment the space in the strategic growth area, it would be my opinion that it's got to be within 250 to 300 meters, which is about a 2.5 3 minute walk. Once you get beyond that, you know, into the 400 to 500 meters, that's 5 6 minute walk, and you're starting to lose interest for the walk. So I think you know, it needs to be relatively close, and you could absolutely set a parameter based on a walking distance. And again, it's on the periphery, so I would typically say 500 meters, but that's the 5 minute walk from the edge. If you really want to get closer to the center, so I would say, you know, 250 300 meters would be the proximity you would be looking for if the intent is that it serves the folks within the strategic growth area.
Thank you. Would a consideration also include whether they're major arterials or you know, wide highways or not highways, major arterials or bridges that are required, because that deals with the timing factor as opposed to the distance, correct?
I think timing as well as safety. You know, a very long time ago, I worked for the town of Oakville on the Trafalgar Road study. I was much younger. And it was a pretty scary proposition to walk over the bridge on the QEW. You know, with the slip lanes and all of the traffic, you know, that's a barrier. So I think you should be considering walking distance in light of barriers to that walking distance, and that would include major roads. Certainly Trafalgar is a major road, and the bridge over the QEW is a significant barrier, and those kinds of things I think are reasonable consideration.
All right, in terms of POPs, how long have those been popular? Is like, have they been going on for decades now, or are they just becoming more prevalent because of the demands on development?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a bit of both. They have been around for a while. What's new is that they count for some component of parkland dedication. That is new, and that's part of new legislation. But they've been around for a long time. The key is that if they are to count, then there has to be a legal agreement for that ensures public accessibility, design standards and maintenance standards. If they don't do that, they don't count.
All right, so I get an increasing number of calls from residents that live in condos that reach out as a result of major maintenance that's required on the building, and why should they have to pay for it? And given construction costs and the age of some of the condo buildings, are we heading towards difficulty, or are residents heading towards difficulties that are living in these condos? That there could be some serious expenses here in the future, whether it be water leaking into garages, safety, whatever. Are we at that point yet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is an excellent question. And it's something that needs to be considered when you're thinking about POPs and whether or not to accept them. Not only are long-term maintenance costs part of a concern, actually public accessibility is also a concern. Some condo owners just say after a number of years, say, you know, we kind of like it as our own private space, and we don't want to share it anymore. Well, the implication is then they would have to go back and pay the credit that they got for parkland dedication, and then they could have it back. But that doesn't resolve 300 condo owners coming to council and say, hey, what's going on here? You know, we can't afford to replace it. We can't afford to pay you the parkland dedication credit that happened at the time of construction. This doesn't seem fair. What are you going to do for us? So absolutely, it's a real issue that needs to be considered when you're thinking about giving credit to POPs or not.
All right, thank you. And last question, the 12% of open space, let's call it. Any standards or best practices in terms of concrete versus community gardens versus dog parks versus soft surfaces?
Mr. Mayor, my only answer to that is yes, you should do all of those things. Is there really that I've seen every place that I've looked at had a different kind of mixture of those things? And again, where my office sits, I've been there for over 30 years, and I've been watching the urban park system evolve over time. Dogs are a huge question. And only recently, condo corporations, new condos are required to provide in building dog facilities on the roof or elsewhere. So I think it's a real balance that you're going to need to find as to hard surface, soft surface, and what the parks are used for. I think my opinion is that dog facilities should be part of the condo, so that your park system and sidewalk system are not subject to being the dog repository. I love dogs, but the owners sometimes forget that other people are supposed to use those facilities with a reasonable expectation of health and safety concerns being covered. But at the end of the day, I did include some guidelines. Certainly, the urban parks need to have green aspects to them. Some will be more green than others. But at the end of the day, when they're being designed, it's really up to your staff and yourselves to make a determination as to what you think is correct within any strategic growth area. there'll be a little bit of everything. But you want to hit the right balance. Best practices. In Ontario, there's not that many mature strategic growth areas. Getting to the densities that we're looking for under the growth plan. Again, my office where I sit, yes, it's urbanizing. 32 years ago, we were arguing about 18-story buildings. Now it's 100-story buildings. We have limited park space. We are getting the small elements, pops for the most part, and some connecting links. But the key is the level of use of the larger elements. That just keeps getting greater and greater and greater every year. And that means maintenance costs go higher and higher and higher every year. So it's a real balancing act. First of all, getting the right hierarchy over time. Secondly, designing and programming the spaces that you get. And of course, fundamentally important is making sure they're properly maintained.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. And Councillor McNeice.
Thank you, through your worship. Thank you, Mr. Palmer, for your presentation and taking all our questions here. I just wanted to follow up on a few topics that other councillors have brought up. Maybe I'll dive into ops first. We've got in our wards a few sort of public easement agreements through condos for access to various things like walkways or stairs and stuff like that. And I would agree, as time goes on, these have been in place for almost a generation, that the next generation of owners aren't as willing to share that space with you as the ones who, you know, knew that it was part of the deal to get the development approved. So it becomes challenging to maintain that and enforce it. In some areas, I've seen POPs be indoor public spaces. Through the legislation, this is more New York City and stuff, where it's, you know, doors close at 8 p.m. There's various levels of security. Is that something that's contemplated through the direction we're being given by the province?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a very good question. I think that through the legal agreement, and again, this is only if they count, that you have some ability to mandate hours of operation. And like you, I looked at New York City, and most of their parks, whether they're indoor or not, close at a specific time every day. And those are through their legal agreements, or they're simply owned by a trust who determines what those opening and closing hours are. So I don't see any problem, and I don't have a huge negative reaction to an indoor pop, depending on what it is and how it's designed. But I do think that that would require part of the agreement to say how long during the day it has to remain open.
Okay, so there's nothing that would preclude it from being an indoor publicly accessible space in the legislation we have to adhere to.
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it's good to know. And then also, is it I mean, what is the exact language from the province? Is it a shall? We shall consider POPs, or is it we may consider them? I mean, are we sort of being forced to do it, or is it we need to consider it?
Well, like all pieces of provincial legislation, it's never that clear.
Okay.
However, my reading of it, and it doesn't say strata or POPs.
Okay.
It calls it encumbered open spaces or something like that. And no, it is not explicit. Other than to, I think you have to consider them. I know that at least one municipality has accepted them and given them across the board 100% credit. That was not my recommendation. I think that through your legal counsel, that question is a good one. I do think you have to consider accepting them. The regulations that we've been waiting for almost a year are expected to explain and clarify exactly that question for us. And we haven't got those yet. So that's something that still needs to be fully resolved, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you for that. Now talking about parkland and SGAs, so I understand you say there's we need to find that right mix of hardscape, softscape. I guess my concern is, in a lot of these more urban areas, really challenging to build out some of the environmental features of parks, say build the tree canopy. That's a lot easier to, the kind of lollipop trees that go into new developments have a real hard time growing. Whereas if you have a bit more space, a bit more sunlight, it helps build the canopy. It also helps with, other environmental features like stormwater management. If you've got some softscaping and, there's even kind of more urban rain garden type things. Are you kind of concerned with in SGAs, how are we going to maintain features like that when we've got, already a hard time planting a tree in a very urban area?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, another good question. Keeping in mind that the level of use of an urban park space is significantly more than a typical traditional park space. So you have to be ready for that. And the use of softscaping and the life of a tree is an important consideration, particularly if the park is built over structure. So for example, my latest research says that the rubber membrane lasts a maximum of 40 years. So that gives you a number that says immediately you're going to have to replace the entire urban park if it's built over structure every 40 years. Now, there's all sorts of research on soil depth and how it gets watered and maintenance protocols and all that sort of stuff that is important for consideration. But I think going back to the issue of condo owners and the desirability of having public open space that they're responsible for, keeping in mind it has to be rebuilt whenever that rubber membrane wears out.
Yeah, that's a good point. We actually have about it should be right about a 40-year-old condo building that's going through that now, where the rubber membrane has gone over the parking garage and all the trees went with it, and lovely new landscaping, but it's going to take a while to build that canopy back. Just two more questions. So in our mature and established areas that tend to have those larger neighborhoods, parks, one thing I'm starting to notice is we're having more and more challenges with stormwater. In some of these more established areas, as new buildings come in with larger footprints and deeper basements, we're getting a lot more flooding. And we're starting to consider some of that park space. I mean, it's a small part of it, but I don't know if this is becoming a trend for stormwater management. So whether it's underground in a tank or it's a stormwater management pond, but that takes out a small section of parks in mature and established areas, to do with, I guess, climate change issues. Is that becoming a trend, or is that something we should be concerned about in our mature and established areas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely, you should be concerned about that. In my discussions with the development industry, which is not exactly relevant, but they're very interested in traditional kind of greenfield development to build parks over top of storm water management features. Now, Jerome Park, so if you were to build a stormwater management feature within an existing park, you could build a new element of park space over top of that pond. So that would be a no net loss approach. However, there's a cost to that. Urban stormwater management is different, so I'm a little less concerned about the strategic growth areas, but I do believe you're correct that stormwater management is a big deal in our traditional neighborhoods. And there's limited opportunity other than in public open space, or if you're going to do something with road rights of way. But there's not that many opportunities to enhance stormwater management. That's a fascinating topic. Are the parks in the right place to accommodate storm facilities? Or if the park is adjacent to an existing storm facility, is there a way to enhance that facility and replace the park partially on top of it? Those are all things that I think you would need to consider. But it's very important because it appears that stormwater from 40 years ago is not the same as it is today.
Right. Well, thank you for that. One final question, and I'm looking at page 12 of our staff report, just on the parkland dedication bylaw. Just want to make sure I understand the percentages correctly. And I know we're trying to get the maximum percentage we can. So the province has capped us at 10% of the land or value. If it's less than 5 hectares, 15% if it's more. But the first point here says that the conveyance of parkland at a rate of 5% of the land area is what we're targeting. I think there's something in here I'm just not understanding, but maybe others aren't understanding it too.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, another good question. It's in the Planning Act for residential development, they identify 3 standards for parkland dedication. The baseline is 5%. And that is the appropriate amount based on the density that you achieve. It's the most based on the density that you achieve, which is somewhere around 55 persons per hectare. Then there's an alternative rate, 1 hectare per 600. And that doesn't really come into play until you're almost at 100 persons per hectare. So really, you're going to be using 5% until you get up to 100 persons per hectare. That's approximate number. So at the 1 hectare per 600, you have to be pretty dense. And then notwithstanding that alternative rate, there's a maximum cap based on site size. So there's 3 parts to the residential dedication piece. My expectation is you'll be using 5% up to around 100. I don't know where the 1 hectare per 600 fits in with the 10%, 15% cap, but I'm sure there's a window where that is going to get you what you need or what you're allowed to take. And then there's the cap that comes into play.
Okay. So I trust we're shooting for the max in this complicated formula.
For everything, I believe that the parks plan gives the city the justification for the maximum opportunity.
Okay. Well, thank you for fielding all of our questions, and that's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Palmer, Councillor Haslett-Thiel is on.
Mr. Palmer, thank you very much. You answered lots of my questions through my council colleagues, great questions. A few follow-ups. So you referenced that this is really tools for us to be able to use. I'm not sure if you called it a guiding document, but these are recommendations. But then there are choices that we make as council in how we, there are choices we have to make, whether or not it's a promenade, whether or not it's a strata, whether or not, those are all choices that at least I took away from your comments that council would with staff make. Is that, did I understand you correctly?
I think that, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that is mostly correct. There are some statutory elements in the Planning Act that you're going to have to do. But most of this document, the Parks Plan itself, is a series of recommendations supported by a number of appendices. And outside of the parkland dedication bylaw, which is really a compendium of Planning Act requirements, the procedural manual attempts to take most of the other recommendations and turn them into a procedural manual. That needs to go to the public and back to you for adoption. And through that process, you will have the opportunity to refine, adjust, and go from there.
Okay. So thank you for that clarification. So when Councillor Algar mentioned that there was a change, I think on recommendation 50 or 51 or 52 about council, it going through council, do you see that as then being part of the parkland procedure and where we can straighten that out?
I'm going to have to mention that to staff and see where it appropriately goes. I believe it is appropriately in the procedural manual. But I would have to go back. Again, between this document and the previous one, it's made a couple of hundred changes. So I don't remember where everything came from or why we made it, but I will absolutely make staff aware of this concern, and I'm positive it's in the procedural manual. But I want to make sure before I.
Thank you for taking that up. I'm having just a question on Crown agencies and parkland dedication. I just want to make sure I've got this straight because I've heard it different ways. So Metrolinx is an owner of land in one of our SGAs. Are they required to contribute parkland dedication? As I read it, it was not, and I just, you're the expert, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
Well, I can tell you what their opinion will be. I don't think they're specifically identified as someone who gets an exemption through the legislation. But it may be a broader exemption for provincial agencies.
Right.
I would check on that as well.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. So a couple of other just follow-ups. So there's later tonight, we're going to look at community permit planning. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the achievement of parkland, so we have a parks plan that has got recommendations. And then there's the parkland dedication bylaw that says certain percentages. If we are using a community permit planning process, how does this impact the parkland dedication bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's an excellent legal question.
Okay.
I would expect that the community planning permit system incorporates the requirement for parkland dedication with the associated exemptions for affordable housing or whatever else is precluded. But I have not seen a community planning permit bylaw under the new legislation since they changed section 37.
Okay. All right. So I'll follow up with legal. Thanks very much. I wanted to compliment you on the section on page 16, that's 3.2, and you took considerable effort to talk about quality of place and quality of life. On days when I get a little bit down about where we might be headed in this world, I think it's a great section to reread because you really do reflect the value of green and about parks, and then you go on to, in the next part of it to talk about the economic value to those that are landowners in the area. So my hat's off to you for providing us with something that really does reinforce what we need to cherish and take care of. So with that, those are my questions for you, Mayor Burton. I have a couple procedural things that I'd like to table, and I just look to you for your advice around the appropriate time.
Well, let us, you have the floor and you can do it now.
Okay. So we have on 7.1 several items to either receive, pass, endorse, etc. I'd like to suggest that while we can receive the report tonight that we have, that the parks plan be received, not necessarily endorsed, and that staff be asked to provide us with a summary of some of the comments that they've heard around how that may impact the use of the parks plan or the decision making that occurs. So I guess my ask is that the parks plan be received and that the minutes reflect the concerns and questions and suggestions of council. And I would like to add a fifth resolution, and that is that staff prepare a parkland acquisition strategy for council consideration in advance of the 2025 budget. As we heard from Mr. Palmer, I think he actually said it's something more like immediate, or it's an important thing to get on with this parks acquisition. And so that's why I'm tabling number 5. And so those are the procedural things that I wanted to reference. If you need a motion for 7.1 to be received, 2 to be received, 3 to be received, and 4 to be passed, I'd be prepared to do that so long as number 5 is also added, which is what I have referenced.
So technically, you have moved receipt of the items you named and passing of the bylaw and the request to staff to provide the park plan under the acquisition strategy before the 25 budget. I would only and I think everybody's clear on that, and we're in committee of the whole, and we don't need a second. Councillor McNeice, are you wanting to add something to this, or?
Through your worship, just some clarification. I believe 7.2 would be amended because it reads endorsed. I believe I heard Councillor Hassett say received 7.2. Is that correct?
No, we're on discussion item 7.1.
Or sorry, 7.1. Sorry, recommendation number 2, I meant.
Right. So the staff recommendation is that the parks plan be endorsed, and Councillor Hazeltine wants to receive it. I was about, so are you clear on that? Because when you're clear, I'm going to go back to her.
I'm clear now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. It strikes me as a little bit odd to want an acquisition strategy before you have an endorsed parks plan. And so I'm just curious about which comes first, the parks plan or the plan to acquire the parks? Is there something about the parks plan that you want to change?
So thank you for that question. I think that there were several items called out tonight by my fellow councillors. I'll look to them that don't resonate in terms of the direction that we necessarily may all agree with. So as an example, recommendation 17, I fundamentally struggle with not prioritizing SGA green space, given that the time's a ticking and we need to acquire land if we are going to try to get green space there. So the reason I was asking for the acquisition plan was, in general, we understand shapes, forms, etc. of different types of parks, but if we have a comprehensive acquisition plan that we can look at, we can get started on opportunities and alignment around that at the budget time. If you have a different recommendation, Mayor Burton, obviously I'd love to hear it.
I would suggest we endorse the parks plan and remember that we can amend it later. But if you want an acquisition strategy, you ought to have a parks plan that lays out what you're trying to acquire. Myself, I read these recommendations as choices that we get to make, not things that we have to do. So anyway, the motion's on the floor to receive rather than endorse, and unless someone moves to amend Councillor Hazlett's motion to make it, actually you can't amend to be contrary. You'd have to defeat, you'd have to vote, someone would have to move to consider that separately, defeat that, and then replace it with endorse. So I'm gonna call on the town solicitor before I call on Councillor Knoll. Mr. Carr.
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you. With me tonight, I have Nadia Chandra of our department, as well as Andrew Biggert. And if it pleases council, this might be a good opportunity to request to go in camera to receive some thoughts about whether or not it makes a difference to receive versus endorse the parks plan, and in connection with how it may or may not impact our ability to pass the bylaw. So I think I'm respectfully asking an opportunity to provide that advice in camera.
All right, thank you, Mr. Carr. Councillor Knoll, were you about to make that motion?
Oddly enough, I was going to ask the question that Doug led us to, and I will make the motion to go into camera.
Thank you.
I want advice on this very issue.
All right, so the motion is to resolve into a session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving advice and the commentary necessary. Let's see. Mr. Carr, give me that motion, will you please?
Oh, a motion to receive advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege.
Thank you. Is there any objection to Councillor Knoll's motion? Madam Clerk, there is no objection. That carries. Council, typically we take several minutes to rearrange the technology to have a meeting closed to the public for a legitimate purpose like this. I'm going to offer that we are in recess for, let's see, it is 1942. How about we're in recess until 1950, till 7:50, 10 minutes of 8. Okay? We're in recess. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm calling the council meeting back into session. Council has met briefly in a session closed to the public for the which we can do under the Municipal Act and our procedure bylaw for the purpose of receiving advice subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And the chair recognizes Councillor Hazlett.
Mayor Burton, I'd like to defer 7.1 for one cycle to address questions and concerns raised by council.
Thank you. Councillor Hazlett has withdrawn her previous motion and moves deferral for a cycle. Is there any objection to that motion? I see no objection. It carries. Congratulations, Councillor. We now move to item 7.2, which is the white paper, Planning Act Tools to Facilitate Development of Affordable Housing. This paper grew out of a growing sense of interest by many members of council, if not all of us, in the community planning permit system, or as the Planning Act calls it, the development permit system. And as a bonus, the white paper that's been produced discusses, let me call it, other similar tools to that one that allow council to achieve some of its objectives. And we have a presentation from Sybil von Kersel, who has been with us since, I believe, since January or December, and is actually an expert in this field. So, Ms. von Kersel, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, however virtual it may be. And I read with interest that white paper and the report. And I was very interested to see how many powers we might have. And I thank you for laying them out so clearly. And you have the screen, so to speak, or the floor, and we look forward to your presentation on this matter.
And Mr. Mayor, just to kick things off, if I might, tonight is part one of the Affordable and Attainable Housing Strategies program. And tonight is the so-called 101 portion, where we'll provide an overview of the three tools, being the community planning permit system, inclusionary zoning, and community improvement plans, and how they are used and how they are developed. On April 8th, our education will continue with a deeper dive into the community planning permit system, where Justine Giancola from Dillon Consulting will be joining us to talk about their experience in developing the CPPS bylaws. And now I'd like to introduce Sibel von Kersel. Sibel is manager Midtown program, and she's among other things specifically working on the affordable and attainable housing strategies for Midtown, including what you'll hear tonight. And Sibel was in fact at the province when the CPPS was introduced, and was the part of the team that provided training and education for the professionals across the province and training on the CPS tool itself. Additionally, Sibel was responsible for Richmond Hill's affordable housing strategy and led the work on Richmond Hill's protected major transit station area OPAs, and pioneered the municipality's use of the community improvement plans in Richmond Hill. And now with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Sibel to provide the overview.
Mr. Commissioner, thank you very much. And I couldn't imagine a better birthday present than that session with Dylan, because April 8th is my birthday. I look forward to this very much. Sibel, we're all ears.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Neil and Mayor, for the introduction. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm quite excited to be presenting to you this report that I've been working on for the last couple of months. The presentation will be a very brief overview, just introducing you to the white paper, Planning Act Tools to Facilitate the Development of Affordable Housing. I'll also provide you an overview of Planning Act tools recommended for implementation in the staff report, and I'll explain the recommended option for enacting those tools over the next 2 years. You'll see there's an appendix with the presentation, and that's simply provided in the event that there are some questions that arise, and that may assist in responding to those questions. The white paper is a reference and resource document for the town. It supplements the draft housing strategy and action plan by providing information that is specific to Planning Act tools that facilitate affordable housing. It provides information about inclusionary zoning, the community planning permit system, the community improvement plan, the community benefits charge, and another tool called the Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator. The report also identifies opportunities and challenges regarding the facilitation of affordable housing in Oakville, and it provides a series of options the town could consider to address those challenges and leverage opportunities. And the report concludes with a recommended option and a path to implement it. There is a lot of material in the report, starting with a preliminary overview of the housing situation in Oakville. The white paper was structured to provide high-level information about the 5 Planning Act tools and how they facilitate the development of affordable housing, with much more detail provided in the appendices of the report. But tonight, I'm just going to be speaking about the inclusionary zoning, the CPPS, and CIP in general, because those are the tools that are recommended to be further investigated and, if deemed appropriate, implemented in Oakville. And as Neil mentioned, in April, we could come back to you with some more details around the community planning permit system, because we simply don't have enough time to go through that level of detail tonight. So the first tool I'll speak about is the inclusionary zoning tool. It's specifically designed to require a proportion of housing units within new development to be affordable at a maximum affordable price or rent for a set period of time. The use of the tool is limited to areas identified as protected major transit station areas, and they can only apply to residential development that is 10 or more units. Since late 2022, the province has been contemplating amending the inclusionary zoning regulation. If amended, the province would limit the affordability period to a maximum of 25 years, the maximum proportion of units to 5% of the total units, and would provide a minimum affordable price or rent a municipality could require through inclusionary zoning. On that basis, many municipalities contemplating using IZ are holding off on adopting amendments until a decision on this regulation change is made. But in order to use the inclusionary zoning, there are several implementation steps that need to be undertaken that are noted on the slide. In Oakville, we would need to undertake a housing needs assessment report in order to understand what is our supply and demand for housing and what are the gaps. This assessment will also consider market conditions and market impacts of imposing inclusionary zoning. The next step is to identify protected MTSA areas where inclusionary zoning could apply. Presently, Halton Region has identified 2 PMTSAs in Oakville. However, there are other locations within the town that could qualify as PMTSA, so more could be identified if it makes sense to do so. Steps 3 and 4 that are noted on the slide could occur concurrently, and they are when we would be enabling official plan policies and adopting IZ provisions that would be adopted by council. These amendments are not subject to appeal except by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So once the bylaw is in effect, new development that is not exempt from inclusionary zoning will be required to provide affordable units in accordance with the bylaw. And finally, to ensure that the bylaw is responsive to town needs and market conditions, the town will need to update the housing needs assessment and amend policies and/or provisions accordingly every 5 years. So in terms of how this supports affordable housing, there's a few ways. At the outset, identifying all or parts of a protected major transit station area as areas that are subject to inclusionary zoning indicates to landowners within the specified area their obligation to provide affordable housing to meet or exceed the minimum standards specified in the bylaw. And by doing so, once established, land value in the area is expected to be tempered and land speculation is curbed. And this should therefore have a cost reduction impact on new development, which can be applied specifically to the IZ units or the units of the building overall. Depending on how the bylaw is structured, its imposition may result in an increased supply of rental and/or not-for-profit housing that would not otherwise occur through a business-as-usual housing supply system. The inclusionary zoning bylaw may foster more for-profit and not-for-profit partnerships than what is currently occurring. Also, when IZ units are brought to market, they are sold or rented at or below threshold prices established in the bylaw, thereby providing a guaranteed set of affordable units at the outset. And where agreements are registered on title that specify affordability periods and threshold prices, then the affordability of that unit is passed on to subsequent renters or purchasers for the specified time period. And that is how we achieve long-term affordability. When there are a sizable number of IZ units in the market and are included in calculations of average market rent or average market price, then this provides overall downward pressure on the housing market. This results in spin-off opportunities for improving housing affordability in the overall housing market. And where municipalities opt to include in their bylaw a requirement to share market uplift of any IZ units sold within the municipality, which is something that's authorized by the IZ regulation, these municipalities would be able to recoup implementation costs and also divert those funds into other affordable housing initiatives to increase the overall supply of affordable housing. So now I'll talk a little bit about the community planning permit system. The ministry describes the CPPS as a land use planning tool that streamlines the development approval process and gets housing to market quicker, and that supports local community building priorities while creating certainty and transparency for the community, landowners, and developers. Now, I'll try to explain how the system works in the next few slides. When a community planning permit bylaw is in effect, anything that is defined as development is required to be authorized by a development permit before it can occur on a site, unless the bylaw exempts any of those activities or matters from having to make an application. The regulation for community planning permit system defines development to be the construction, erection, or placing, or expanding or altering of one or more buildings or structures on land, the laying out and establishment of commercial parking spaces or 3 or more mobile land lease community homes, site alteration, and or the removal of vegetation. So all of these types of things are considered development, and they would have to go through a development permit application process unless they were exempt. The CPPS is a land use control that is an alternative to traditional system of using various bylaws like zoning, site plan control, site alteration, and tree preservation. And it puts those all into a single bylaw. It utilizes one application to achieve the outcomes that are currently achieved through minor zoning bylaw amendment, site plan applications, minor variance applications, site alteration, and tree preservation processes. And it's done through a single permit authorized by one approval authority. Permit approvals may be subject to variances, criteria, or conditions that are provided in the bylaw intended to implement the municipal community planning goals, objectives, and policies. Building permits are then issued in accordance with the CPPS permit, which is considered applicable law. As noted on the slide, the Planning Act and Ontario Regulation 173/06 stipulate that to use the CPPS system, the town must provide enabling policies in its official plan, pass a community planning permit bylaw, and once that is in effect, the town may approve development permit applications and issue development permits, which are then used for issuing building permits. The CPPS is a means to implement the vision and policies of the official plan. As such, adoption of the community planning permit bylaw occurs after the vision and policy framework are complete. The regulation identifies both mandatory and optional policies that can be provided in the official plan to enable the use of the tool. Mandatory policies include a description of the purpose, goals, and objectives of using a community planning permit bylaw, identifying where in the municipality this bylaw could apply, advising whether or not the approval of development permit applications, issuing of permits, and or entering into agreements can be delegated from council to a committee or staff. With respect to the area in which the CPPS is intended to apply, the regulation also requires providing the community building goals and objectives intended for that area, and the provision of policies to assist with achieving those goals and objectives. These would be the policies we are currently consulting on with respect to Midtown Oakville, for example. Optional policies include types of criteria that may be provided in the community planning permit bylaw for decision-making in general, and also in relation to specific matters such as the permission of a use of land. Types of conditions that may be imposed when issuing a decision on a development permit application. And the official plan may also include policies required to implement inclusionary zoning in order to require the provision of affordable housing. The OP may also identify material to be submitted as part of a development permit application, in addition to what is already required in the relevant regulation associated with this tool. So once the official plan policies are prepared, the implementing community planning permit bylaw may be prepared, and the bylaw is required to provide provisions that implement the mandatory official plan policies, so identify the specific area in which the bylaw applies, and indicate who the approval authority for each class of development is, and what is their scope of authority. The bylaw will include area-specific official plan implementing matters. It will provide all of the matters that we usually see in a zoning bylaw, such as permitted and prohibited uses, minimum and maximum standards to things like height, density, setbacks, frontages, lot coverage, step backs, and angular plane. It will also include criteria. For example, in what manner does the development mitigate negative impacts? And it may include conditions that apply to those permissions, prohibitions, and standards. And I'll talk about the types of conditions in the next slide. Where inclusionary zoning official plan enabling policies are in effect or adopted concurrently, the bylaw may also include IZ implementing provisions to secure long-term affordable housing. And where appropriate, the bylaw may include possible variances to permissions, prohibitions, and standards. And the variances may have specific threshold or be something like a particular requirement may be waived for a certain circumstance. The bylaw is also required to provide administrative information, such as a list of classes of development, including if any of them are exempt from having to apply for a development permit, a description of how an application will be received and processed prior to permit issuance, a description of how and when the public will be notified about applications that are in process, and the decision that is made in relation to them. The regulation allows the CPPS bylaw to provide a range of conditions that may be imposed as part of the approval of a development permit. The regulation lists several examples of conditions which are noted on the slide. And when developing the bylaw, the town will need to be very careful in determining what are appropriate conditions to ensure that they support complete community building and that they are reasonable in relation to the development that is being approved. Some of the conditions contemplate imitating what is already in the Planning Act in relation to matters such as cash in lieu of parking, parkland conveyance, conditions related to holding and temporary use bylaws, and conditions applied with approving site plan applications. Other conditions are related to matters that are associated with municipal act bylaws, such as tree preservation and site alteration. The CPPS bylaw can include IZ-related affordable housing conditions where the official plan has IZ-enabling policies. And other conditions are unique to the CPPS, such as the condition to undertake ongoing monitoring, or a condition that is negotiated based on permissions related to density and or height above specified standards of the CPP bylaw. And any of these conditions may require that the proponent enter into an agreement with the town, and where that is the case, the agreement may be registered on title. So when developing the CPP bylaw, the regulation requires that conditions be of a type that is permitted by the official plan, be reasonable for and related to the appropriate use of land, and not conflict with federal or provincial statutes and regulations. And when including a condition as part of a development permit approval, the regulation requires that the condition be clear, precise, and quantifiable, and clearly indicate when the condition must be fulfilled. So it could be before, during, or after the permit is issued. In the case of negotiated conditions, the regulation also requires that agreed height or density development is within minimum and maximum standard of development or outside the range of variation from standards permitted in the bylaw, and that the agreed upon increase in density and or height is proportional to the quantity or monetary value of the facility, services, and matters that may be required. Accordingly, it is important that the town work in partnership with the development community and the public when establishing the CPP bylaw to ensure that our collective community building interests are met through the implementation of the bylaw. There are some misconceptions about the involvement of the Ontario Land Tribunal with respect to the community planning permit system. So to be clear, the adoption of the community planning permit system policies and bylaw are subject to appeal. However, certain policies and provisions that are sheltered from appeal, such as those related to inclusionary zoning or protected major transit station area permitted uses, height, and density, continue to apply. Once the CPPS bylaw is adopted, applications to amend the bylaw are prohibited for the first 5 years unless permitted by council resolution. And this does not preclude council from initiating an amendment to the CPPS bylaw prior to those 5 years if they wish. The development permit applications may also be appealed by the applicant for a non-decision after 45 days or within 20 days after the decision is issued. The applicant or town may also make a motion for directions from the Ontario Land Tribunal regarding the completeness of an application. And with respect to the development permit issuance, the applicant may seek direction from the Ontario Land Tribunal regarding the fulfillment of a condition being met at any time after the decision of the application is issued. So how does this support affordable housing? Under the community planning permit system, because there's only one application to make, which is then approved by one approval authority, this results in a streamlined process. As such, there is the potential for decisions to be made faster than through the traditional system. Within a PMTSA, the bylaw can include inclusionary zoning provisions, so all of the IZ benefits I mentioned earlier apply when using the CPPS and the PMTSA area. When adopting CPPS policies and bylaw provisions, the municipality has discretion to include conditions in relation to the issuance of a permit. In addition to IZ, a municipality can negotiate community benefits such as affordable housing in exchange for an increase in height or density of development above the thresholds provided in the bylaw. And this opportunity to negotiate for community benefits such as affordable housing can occur anywhere in the municipality where the CPPS bylaw is in place, subject to the provisions of the bylaw and the policies of the official plan. Furthermore, the ensuing agreement regarding the provision of community benefits may be registered on title, similar to inclusionary zoning, and as such, the conditions would apply to subsequent property owners. The bylaw can include criteria regarding where and when affordable housing is encouraged or required. And this criteria can take into consideration matters such as built form, tenure, and viability of development. Finally, unlike a traditional planning system tool, the approval of a development permit may include conditions that are required to be met after the issuance of the permit. And as such, where a condition of permit approval requires the provision of affordable housing units, the property owner may be required to provide proof of affordability to maintain the permissions granted to the property. And in this regard, this requirement can be used to assist the town with monitoring of its programs to create and maintain its supply of affordable housing. So now I'll move on to the community improvement plan. The community improvement plan is a financial tool used to incentivize private development to do something it would otherwise not likely do. And as noted on the slide, the town may buy, sell, lease, and or improve land and buildings, issue grants and loans, and require an agreement with the proponent related to the incentive and the community improvement to be registered on title. And after affordable housing is explicitly identified, affordable housing is explicitly identified in the Planning Act as a community benefit matter. As you probably know, Oakville has a brownfield CIP, which does have provisions to incentivize affordable housing on brownfield lands where residential uses are permitted. There are over 150 CIPs in effect in Ontario. Many of them use it to incentivize affordable housing in some form, predominantly through tax increment equivalent grants, but also through grants and loans. However, any one of the incentives permitted via CIP can support the provision of affordable housing by offsetting the cost of development a proponent would otherwise incur. With respect to land, when providing land at below market value or at no cost, to construct new affordable housing results in a decrease in overall cost of development. Programs that offer land generally depend on a request for proposal process wherein specific requirements for the land use are stated upfront and the municipality can enter into an agreement regarding the delivery and maintenance of the affordable units. Provision of grants to support a range of matters from feasibility studies to construction of affordable units results in a decrease in overall cost of development and incentivizes a proponent to at least investigate what can be done to provide affordable housing units. Grants can be offered in various forms, such as rebating of application fees, development charges, or the property tax increment associated with the new property value after construction of new units. Provision of loans at municipal financing rates assists with reducing costs associated with new development and construction, as well as renovation of existing units or conversion of non-residential development to residential uses. And as an example, the provision of forgivable loans in support of creation of additional residential units, subject to being rented at or below affordable thresholds, maintains the incentive to keep the units affordable over a period of time. So I'll speak now to the recommendations of the staff report. The white paper discussed various opportunities and challenges that have led to the staff recommendations we are asking council to approve tonight. In brief, the opportunities include federal and provincial funding related to achieving housing targets, which can be directed towards the implementation of the CIP. Planning Act changes related to inclusionary zoning, the community planning permit system, and protected MTSAs provide more planning certainty, additional streamlining of approvals, and further empower council decision-making with respect to the provision of affordable housing. The Midtown Oakville program is complemented by years of consultation and study to support decision-making in Midtown and can be used to guide the development of bylaws once the OPA is approved. The town's comprehensive zoning bylaw review process is already planned and budgeted. We can leverage this exercise and use it as an opportunity to transition to a CPP bylaw where deemed appropriate. Halton Region's support for affordable housing CIPs could supplement the future CIP program, and we can learn from the implementation of the town's current brownfield CIP and potentially expand that program to address affordable housing on non-contaminated lands. And our existing community benefits charge bylaw could be leveraged to fund affordable housing programs and or permit affordable housing to be an in-kind matter. The challenges identified in the report include the increasing rise of current house and cost and rent, which is making access to affordable housing more difficult. So through a housing needs assessment, we'll be able to get a more clear picture of what are the current and forecasted housing gaps. The housing targets we have committed to over the next 3 and 10 years are higher than historic rates. There's a lot of competition among municipalities to reach those targets, and it is dependent on how motivated landowners are to act on their approvals. Without achieving the targets, the town will not be able to receive the provincial and or federal funding. There are numerous priorities that the town is working on, and when adding new initiatives with a 2-year turnaround time, it means we need to allocate new resources and or reallocate resources from other projects. And finally, some of the tools like inclusionary zoning and community planning permit system, they're new and they're not widely implemented. So this means the town does not have a lot of precedents to work with in terms of developing and adopting these tools. But me being the optimist that I am, I see this as an opportunity as well, because it means we can be more innovative in our approach to using the tool. And finally, as with any new program, town will need to develop new or rework existing processes to implement them. So that too can be a challenge in the short term. So staff are proposing a 3-phase process to investigate Planning Act tools and, if deemed appropriate, sequentially adopting them. The first phase entails developing the overall project work and consultation plan, procuring consultants, and starting the housing needs assessment. We would also continue to continue to undertake research related to the community planning permit system, and we would be recommending adoption of the Midtown Oakville OP update, along with adding mandatory community planning permit system policies to the official plan. The second phase entails completing the housing assessment and starting our CIP background work, adopting the community planning permit system and IZED enabling official plan amendments, and the Midtown Oakville community planning permit bylaw within a year of the OPA coming into effect. And if deemed appropriate, we may adopt IZED bylaw in other PMTSC areas like the Bronte Go. The third phase entails adopting the community improvement plan, which can leverage provincial and federal funding, and adopt additional CPP bylaws where deemed appropriate. So as noted in the white paper, consultation on these tools should be undertaken through a 6-step process. And where possible, these steps for each tool should be undertaken concurrently to minimize consultation fatigue and maximize town resources. So this brings me to the conclusion of my presentation with these recommendations. 1, to receive the report and white paper for information, to direct staff to initiate work to further investigate and develop inclusionary zoning, community planning permit system, and community improvement plan, Planning Act tools. And thirdly, to approve a budget of $500,000 to undertake the work related to the housing needs assessment, the community improvement plan, and the overall project coordination over the next 2 years. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that excellent summary of the 56-page paper, which I tell you, I haven't enjoyed a report quite as much in a long time. If we do this, it'll be a big deal. I was involved in a town task force before I ever got involved in politics, whose objective was revitalization and redevelopment of a area of town that needed it. And one of our recommendations was a CIP, which never happened. So I've been on this a long time. Councillor McNeice has also been a bit of a spark plug for this this term. Councillor McNeice, you had your hand up first, so you go next.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I'm with the mayor that I really enjoyed this staff report in this read, and welcome to the team, Sibel. I think it's a great addition here at a very timely point as we look at affordable housing. Just a few comments, and also I'd be happy to move the motion at the appropriate time. Is it fair to say that there's other say byproducts or benefits of specifically CIP and CPPS in addition to affordable housing? I'm thinking about when we want to revitalize a community, it provides a lot more predictability, and there's there's been minimal impacts to it from housing bill changes and things like that. Could you just maybe touch on those points?
Sure, absolutely, yes. So the focus of the paper was with respect to supporting affordable housing, but certainly both the CIP and the community planning permit system can be leveraged for all kinds of community building endeavors. And as we said in April, we can certainly come back and speak more about the general benefits that can be attributed to the CPPS system, and sort of talk more about how that tool can be leveraged to support community building within Oakville.
Okay, thank you for that. And I know we're, I like the word you use, trailblazers in this in Ontario. However, the concept has been around for quite a while, and I believe it's more commonplace. It's almost like the planning system in British Columbia, a little bit in Alberta as well. You know, is it sort of fair to say that it's not completely uncommon in Canada? It's had some, I guess, confusion in how to use it in Ontario, maybe.
No, that's absolutely true. Systems like this have been used in other provinces in Canada. I focused on Ontario because we kind of have to work within the parameters that were given by the legislation and the regulations. But even implementing the Niagara Escarpment Plan uses development permits. So we have a long history of using the system. I think it's just important to recognize that it's a regulatory tool. It's a system. It's just a different way of processing applications, but there's lots of other attributes to it. as I tried to clarify or, briefly speak about as I was speaking, in terms of, building in the criteria, building in conditions, building in variances, those things are, make it different from the way we write our zoning bylaws, but, the implementation to it, you'll see that there's similarities with site plan control, there's similarities with minor variance, but the idea is if you streamline them into one approval process, things will happen more efficiently, and there is that bigger understanding of how an official plan is getting implemented through this tool.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I think this comprehensive approach is the right approach because the challenge of affordable housing is just insurmountable, and the tools we have currently, many communities are struggling to adapt them, especially for affordable housing. So I think we owe it to our community to throw every planning tool at it possible, and we'll certainly work to, come up with the best solutions we can within our planning parameters. And it sounds like we're heading in that direction. So I'd be happy to support this. And I believe there is a delegate too at the appropriate time.
There is, and your motion's in order and on the floor, but we won't vote on it until we hear from delegations and debate it. And next up is Councillor Sheik.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you for the presentation and the reports. One clarity questions. So on page 94, so if we implement the CPPS, so we don't have any chance to collect the CBC, is that correct?
Yes, that's one of the, I guess the trade-offs is we wouldn't be collecting the community benefit charge, but there are, because you can build in conditions, especially the one with respect to negotiating for height and density, I think we could work something out where we would get similar results, but it would be within the confines of this community planning permit bylaw area.
I see. So there is some opportunity, other ways to collect.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hazlitt-Teal.
Thank you very much for that exceptional presentation. I just have a couple clarifying questions, and in terms of the PTMSA, so the Protected Transit Station areas, did I read correctly in your report? And I just want to make sure I understand it, that that we can set height maximums, and so long as we achieve the minimum density that's assigned to us, that it's not appealable?
So what the legislation says is once we adopt the policies with respect to minimums and maximums, the maximums densities are not subject to appeal. The maximum height could be subject to appeal if it's demonstrated that you couldn't meet the minimum density to satisfy the minimum density.
Okay, and we currently have that in effect, right, under a PTMSA, right? That rule applies currently right now?
So the Halton region has identified its PMTSAs, Protected Major Transit Station Areas. That's okay, it's too many acronyms. So Halton region has identified 2 in the Halton region official plan, so Midtown Oakville being one of them, and Bronte Go the other. So now we need to update our official plans to recognize these PMTSAs and establish the permitted uses and heights and densities and the whole thing. So we need to undertake that next step.
And so my last question is that if CPPS, did I get that acronym correct?
Yes.
If that's implemented, when is it in effect? So we potentially pass a Midtown OPA. It has enabling CPPS.
Yes.
Or what are the rights and privileges that come with having that in place, in effect, on the day it's passed, or is it a year later?
Oh, once the CBP bylaw is passed and not appealed, it's in effect. And then we move to this new approvals process of using development permits. instead of using site plan approvals and minor variances and those tools. So, yes, so it would be in effect. I mean, you would, once there's no appeals, it's in effect.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Councillor McNeice?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify one thing from Councillor Haslett-Thiel's comments on the Midtown. So when the OPA comes into effect, that basically just enables the bylaw to be written, which is the enabling legislation, right? So the OPA itself would not enable it. The bylaw,
Yes.
CPPS bylaw for Midtown would have to be done,
Yes.
and that 1 year for appeal and stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I guess I should just clarify one thing. So the Planning Act allows for, or asks that we adopt our zoning or CPP bylaw within 1 year of the Midtown OPA coming into effect to protect the permitted use and height and density provisions of that official plan amendment. So that's why we want to work within the year from when Midtown is approved to do the CPP implementing bylaw for that official plan.
Okay. Madam Clerk, is there a possibility that you could call the registered delegation? And while you're doing that, I'll just mention again that if you're watching and would like to contribute to our discussion, you can be added to the meeting by calling 905-815-6095. And here comes our delegation. I can see on my screen. Mr. Belcher, hello. I believe we can hear you. Oh, yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, cool. Is it too loud or like?
No, it's fine, and it's. I don't think it's under your control. So
okay, cool.
Please begin.
Lovely. Yeah, I just wanted to say how impressed I am with the white paper. I read it over the weekend, and I just felt like it was very good. It covered a lot of the questions that I had as a resident. And I'd really like to see some of the recommendations passed within this white paper, because I've been a big CPPS advocate for a little while now, and I'm really glad that we're at this point where we have something actionable that we can really attack. So, yeah, I just wanted to keep it short and sweet tonight. But yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belcher. We appreciate the engagement of everybody in town. But as I've said, as YTV's founder, I really appreciate a more youthful engagement, which you have pioneered this term. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Council, we have a motion duly made by Councillor McNeice to basically adopt the staff recommendations that you have seen. May I put the vote? Councillor Haslett-Thiel? Is that a yes or no? Or okay. All right. Is there any objection to Councillor McNeice's motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that carries. Congratulations, Councillor McNeice. Council, we now get to turn to our last discussion item, 7.3. And this is the Halton Region 2023 Allocation Program update from staff. We have a presentation, in addition to the report that Mr. Charles provided us. He's here with a presentation. Mr. Charles, I thank you for your report. I found it incredibly useful as various parties called me over the weekend to try to lobby me, and I was able to quote you back at them and push them back. So I appreciated your work very much. You have the floor, the screen, and our attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So the 2023 allocation program from Halton Region has been a project which has been underway at the region for the last several months. And one of the last steps to implementation of the program is for the local municipalities to recommend to the region how servicing allocation will be distributed across the town. For those who are unaware, the allocation program is really the region's way of working through how it will finance and service new greenfield development. So what we term that area north of Dundas for the most part. And this program is unique in that it requires developers to prepay a portion of their development charges so that the region has those funds available to build that regional infrastructure. So that's the roads, the water, the trunk infrastructure, et cetera, pumping stations, and whatnot. Next slide, please. The way that this overall program has evolved is unique from past programs in that the region has identified an entire capacity for the entire regional system, which is about 92,500 units. And that is an important number because that is the number that is required to allow the region to meet the pledge, the housing pledges that each of the 4 municipalities have made throughout the last year or so. And so this program is actually based on units, whereas in previous programs, for those familiar with it, it was related to what we call the STDs, or the single detached equivalent, which was a ratio of being able to identify how a residential unit was tied to a single detached house for the most part. So what the region has said for Oakville is that our number of units that is part of the capacity within the system is 26,178 units. That was the number that was given to us. That's out of the 92,500. The other thing I would mention is that of the 92,000, that or to meet the housing pledges, it's about 73,500 units for the entirety of the allocation program. The balance of those units are those which have been reserved, we'll say, as part of previous allocation programs or identified for future employment, institutional, commercial growth, for example. So what the exercise was for staff was to identify how many units do we have to account for since November of 2022, which is when the region set the parameters of the program. So when we looked at the number of units which were in development applications, which were built, which were approved, which are under appeal, basically within our pipeline, within the build boundary, that's 15,884 units. The balance of those units, just over 10,000, those are the units that we can allocate to North Oakville as part of the Greenfield program and the development. And what I would note is that we had tripled the amount of interest for the units that we could actually allocate. And the other thing that I would notice, which is unique to this program, which hasn't been done before by the region, is identifying infrastructure dependent units. And what those units are units that will be available to be used as once future servicing capacity has been constructed. So as new infrastructure is brought online, or if in fact there's additional capacity which is identified in the current system, that can be turned over and used to help fulfill the 92,500 units or plus in some circumstances. So what the exercise that the staff did, what we did was we looked at how, based on the applications we had, or at least what was in the pipeline, what made sense that would be dependent on those future infrastructure units. We identified just under 9,800 units, but that number is flexible because there isn't a cap on that number the way there is on the 26,178 that we have. Next slide, please. Similar to previous programs the staff have presented, our way of identifying which units should move forward was to look at different evaluation criteria to ensure that the growth across North Oakville was going to be in accordance with the secondary plan. And so our exercise in identifying those sites, which ones were going to meet this criteria, or at least help advance this criteria. Council has mentioned to us a number of times that it makes some sense to bring on the higher density sites as quickly as possible. So we are recommending a number of the sites along Dundas and Trafalgar, which are within our growth corridor, the DUC, the TUC, et cetera, that those should be brought along as well. So some of them were top-ups of previous development applications, others are new requests. And the intent is to find a balance between the higher density, so the mid-rise, the tall buildings, along with the greater land. So you'll see in the next slide, which we can move to now, is how the distribution of those of the allocation has been taken. So those that we are recommending take the full allocation are identified in green, and that really is finishing off neighborhoods, ensuring that we are completing what has been started so that we have servicing to school sites, to parks, that there isn't the leapfrogging of development, if you will, that there's a logical extension to servicing. And then there are some sites where we've recommended just partial allocation. So it could be providing, for example, half of what has been requested, or 3/4, at the very worst case scenario, 40%, which is enough to get an applicant into the program and work with Halton Region to secure their agreement, and allows us to review development applications and continue to move applications forward. The other thing that we've identified with this one is those that we're recommending, those infrastructure dependent units. You'll see that in the hatching across the various units. And really what that is doing is saying in some cases we couldn't provide all of the allocation or recommend the full ask of allocation. So the balance of that can be picked up through IDUs. And what that will allow an applicant to do is move towards securing those additional units once the servicing capacity is available, and allows them to continue to progress through their development cycle and their development plans. And in the next slide, one of the things that we are recommending that we're going to need to work very closely with Halton Region on is an overall monitoring program. Because of this capacity cap that we have of 92,500 units across the region, we need to ensure that as every single new unit is being permitted, we'll say, that's coming off of the ledger. And we're keeping a very close track of how many units are moving through the system, because there will be circumstances we know where certain applications are not going to be moving forward for any number of reasons. And we need to ensure that there's the ability to move those units where it's appropriate to those other applications which are already well underway or getting very close to construction, and they don't yet have the servicing capacity. So it needs to be a little bit fluid to allow us to move to those other applications which may be moving ahead. Similarly, there may be applications which are under appeal, for example, which we know are not going to be able to move forward in a timely fashion. Those may be candidate sites that we're going to need to move around. Now, that's not something that we would be taking lightly. That would be in consultation with Halton Region and really understanding what is the service capacity that's available and how we're going to be moving that around. And that's even not just between built boundary and greenfield, but also amongst those development applications which might be in the north as well. And into the next slide, just to summarize what we have done thus far. The allocation program, as staff are recommending, supports the town's urban structure, facilitates implementation of the OP. It ensures that there is available service capacity to accommodate our planned growth. It does meet council's intent to advance our higher density sites. It does enable the completion of neighborhoods that have been started throughout North Oakville, and it allows for the future infrastructure that can be identified through IDUs to then be realized, and we can support further development that way. And then next slide, please, is just the recommendation as identified in the staff report. And Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to answer any questions, as there are other staff here who can assist where needed.
Wonderful. I'll try to seed the questions. That ability to shift from a unit or a capacity, which we used to call, I guess, an SDE, but that ability to shift infrastructure capacity from somebody who's paid for it to somebody holding an IDU. When the first one has delayed for whatever reason, is this has an element, it feels like this has an element of use it or lose it for them.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think to an extent it is that there has to be a good reason for us to be moving those units around. And obviously if an applicant has paid for those units, we wouldn't take it lightly to move those around. That has been an option in the region's allocation agreements in the past of what, as you term, use it or lose it type clause. The region has been hesitant to exercise that, but they have suggested they might be a little bit more liberal this time around to ensure that each municipality is able to meet its housing pledge by moving the allocation or the servicing capacity around to meet those requirements.
Well, given that we barely have the capacity here to meet our pledge, we're highly motivated, I would think, or incentivized anyway, to raise our hand and talk to the region whenever we find somebody delaying without a good reason. Or we won't make our numbers.
Correct.
Councillor O'Meara, your turn.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to sort of, my question is off of where you were just going with that one with regards to when we would look to maybe, I guess, borrow the SDEs and pay them back, or you know, my questions are what we've allocated for inside the built boundary. And if you take like the Brawny MTSA, for example, I don't think there's anything on the horizon that's going at any time soon. But we know there are other places that are willing to go a lot quicker than that. So how are we going to ensure that, again, to meet our housing targets, so we can get some of the provincial money that they've sort of clawed back from us through Bill 23? How are we going to ensure that the people that are ready to build are getting those STEs as soon as they're ready to go, rather than sitting and waiting and hoping land assemblies happen, you know, applications come in, those sorts of things? What metrics, or how are we going to, is it going to be subjective from the planning department, or are we going to get reports on where these things are? How's that going to sort of play out?
Dear Mr. Mayor, excellent question, Councillor. That is why we need, and we've suggested to the region, we need a seat at the table to work through the parameters of what that monitoring program is going to look like. Because the 15,884 units which we've identified south of Dundas, the next time there's an applicant who, for example, puts in a basement apartment, we're down to 15,883. So that's the kind of tracking that we need to be absolutely aware of, so that we know what is available to move, and who has secured allocation, or where we reserved it, and where is it possible to move it around. We have roughly 10,000 units or so just in pre-consultation stage that we have as well. So we're bumping up against that cap very, very quickly. So that's why we need to ensure that we understand where the demand is and what's the timing of the different development applications. Once they're ready to go, we need to know that we can work with the region to make sure they've got the servicing available.
Thanks. And then the IDUs are almost like a placeholder then? Is that why we're using that? Or I guess, is that why that term is being used now? Because we didn't have that previously. So I mean, just can you explain to me how that sort of fits into our sort of our syntax here of what we're doing? Like, I know there was some trepidation about people having an IDU and not an SDE, but from our conversations with you, I think that's, you know, it's not on the sidelines. Can you just explain a little bit more about what an IDU is and where that is in the queue?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll do my best as a layperson to explain it the way the region has explained it to me. What the infrastructure dependent units allow is in some way a first come, first serve, because those are now units which have been purchased by landowners, and that allows them to, as infrastructure becomes available, to change that unit into one that they can get a permit with. An IDU does not allow them to move towards construction. They need to be able to have or identify that there is capacity in the system to allow them to change that into, as you say, into an STE, allows them to proceed then to a permit. The region has suggested to us there is no cap in terms of the IDUs. It will just be available when it's available. We don't know how a ranking would work, if it would work, or as I said, it was just a first come, first serve the way it was suggested to us. Again, those are further things that we need to work through with the region just to finalize this entire program and how we're going to be working with them to identify who's going to be moving forward next.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for asking the question, Councillor. Regional councillors have an opportunity at the regional council to pursue the question with regional staff as to if or when additional capacity at the plants is going to be created to make it possible to build anything after 2031. Because right now it looks as if you know, there's no plan. So it's going to be interesting out there a few years from now. And the IDUs were conceived of by the region. I remember when they presented it to us at the regional council as a kind of waiting list was the underlying premise. that Mr. Benson used with us. If there are no other questions, can I fish for a motion to approve? Oh, there were so many. You guys were all so fast. Councillor Knoll, I think you beat everybody, so it'll be your motion. Any objection? There being none, that carries. Congratulations, Councillor Knoll, and thank you very much. The rest of our agenda is to rise and report to council. We need another hand raise. Councillor Longo won the hand raise. It's moved by Councillor Longo that we rise and report. And is there any objection to Councillor Longo's motion? I didn't think there would be. That carries. So I rise and report the committee of the whole is met and made recommendations on discussion items 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3. And mover and seconder for this report would be in order. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Grant, thank you. Any objection? Thank you, Councillor Elgar and Councillor Grant. Your motion carries. Is there any emergency, congratulatory, or condolence matter that anyone would like to bring? Councillor Dudek.
Thank you, Your Worship. On behalf of council, I want to express my sincere condolences to Alice Ann LeMay's family. As many of you know, she's been a very strong advocate for the Halton Catholic School Board. She was trustee, as was she chair, and very sad to see of her recent passing, but our thoughts and prayers are with her family.
Councillor Dudek, I understood that the service is at St. Dominic's on Thursday. Am I right about that, or do you know? I don't want to mislead people.
I believe you're correct.
All right. All right, everybody. Then it's time for consideration of reading of bylaws. If we can get a mover and seconder, Councillor Shi and Councillor McNeese, thank you. Any objection? There being none, the bylaws as listed in the agenda are considered read and passed. And that finishes our work. And we did it before the witching hour, so congratulations to all. And enjoy a few extra minutes of the evening. And we're done. See you soon. Bye-bye.